Dawn broke over Coronado like a slow exhale, gray light spilling across the water, mixing with the metallic scent of salt and the faint tang of diesel from the docks. The base was already alive. Whistles cut the morning air, boots struck the ground in perfect rhythm, and a chorus of young voices shouted cadence into the sea breeze. It was another brutal morning at SEAL training where weakness was a sin and hesitation was death. And then, the old man arrived. He stepped through the main gate with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through storms far worse than this. No uniform, no rank insignia, just a plain khaki jacket, faded jeans, and a weathered brown face carved with lines that told stories of long days and longer nights. In his hand, he carried a single folder stamped with the Navy emblem and the words, "Authorized Observer." The young guard at the gate straightened up. "Sir, you sure you're in the right place?" The old man smiled faintly. "I am." His voice was calm, deep, and carried the weight of someone used to giving and receiving orders. The guard hesitated, glanced at the folder, then waved him through. But not before muttering under his breath, "Observer, huh? Looks more like someone's granddad." As the old man walked down the gravel path toward the training fields, heads began to turn. A group of trainees paused mid-drill, confusion spreading across their faces. Who was he? A janitor? A visitor? A mistake? Lieutenant Commander Alexander Reed didn't like surprises, especially not on his field. When word reached him that some civilian observer was wandering the grounds, his jaw tightened. Reed was the kind of man whose uniform always looked ironed by angels. Tall, sharp, every hair in place. His reputation was legendary, efficient, disciplined, ruthless. He spotted the stranger standing near the obstacle course, watching quietly as the trainees climbed, crawled, and shouted their way through the mud. Reed stormed over, boots crunching against gravel. "You lost, old man." His tone was clipped, dismissive. "This isn't a retirement tour." Samuel Thomas didn't flinch. He turned slowly, meeting Reed's eyes with a calm that felt almost unnatural. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said softly. Reed frowned, snatching the folder from his hand. His eyes scanned the document. Real authorization, official seal, top clearance. Still, his pride wouldn't let him show surprise. "Authorized observer," Reed read aloud mockingly. "We don't need civilians slowing us down. You can stand over there out of the way." The words hit like a slap, echoing across the training field. Some of the trainees smirked. Others looked away. Samuel said nothing. He simply nodded once, turned, and stood where Reed had pointed, in the dirt on the edge of the chaos. Minutes passed. The morning sun climbed higher, painting everything gold and unforgiving. Reed barked commands, pushing his men harder, louder, as if to prove a point. Samuel watched quietly, his gaze sharp, measuring. Every fall, every insult, every cut corner, he noticed. When one trainee stumbled, Reed's voice exploded. "You call that a push-up? You're an embarrassment." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. A memory, maybe. A battlefield. A younger man once in that same dirt, fighting to prove himself. Reed turned toward him again. Samuel looked at him for a long time, then simply smiled. "A long way from here, son. A very long way." He turned and started walking toward the barracks, each step slow, deliberate, leaving faint prints in the wet dirt. Reed watched from a distance, his jaw tight. He didn't understand it yet, but something about that old man's presence was unraveling the order of his world. One quiet, unflinching moment at a time, and somewhere deep down, Reed knew this wasn't over. The sun rose hard and bright the next morning, cutting through the mist that had blanketed the base for days. By 6 o'clock, the air already smelled of gun oil, wet earth, and salt water. The sound of shouting, steel on steel, and the rhythmic slap of boots echoed across the compound. Another day, another round of suffering. But the recruits knew something was different now. The old man was back. He stood near the bleachers, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind a pair of old aviator sunglasses. He didn't take notes. He didn't speak. He just watched. And somehow his silence weighed more than any of Reed's shouting. Reed saw him and felt a flicker of irritation twist in his chest. He'd spent his whole career building control, over the men, over the field, over himself, and this stranger's presence chipped at that control like a hammer on glass. By mid-morning, that irritation turned into open contempt. "Form up," Reed barked. The trainees snapped into formation, breath ragged from drills. "You see that man?" He pointed at Samuel standing off to the side. "That's what happens when you waste your prime. Keep slacking and you'll end up just like him, washed out and forgotten." A few of the younger men chuckled nervously, but not Wilson. He glanced at Samuel, then at Reed, and something in his expression hardened. There was respect in his eyes, not pity. Samuel didn't react. He simply adjusted his sleeve, hiding the faint shimmer of the tattoo that had caught Wilson's attention the day before. After training, the men filed toward the mess hall. Reed and a few instructors lingered near the bleachers, voices low and sharp. "Who the hell signed off on that guy?" one of them muttered. "Probably some paper pusher," another said. "We don't need civilians watching us." Reed's voice was colder. "He's not just watching. He's judging. I can feel it." Inside the hall, the smell of eggs and burned coffee filled the air. Trainees ate fast, heads down, too tired to speak. Samuel entered quietly and sat at an empty table in the corner. No food. Just a cup of black coffee and that same small folder resting in front of him. He didn't open it, didn't need to. He just sat there listening. The walls in this place had ears, and so did he. At the next table over, two instructors whispered. "They say he used to be in the Navy." "Yeah? Then why's he got civilian clearance?" "Hell if I know." "Reed's losing it, though. You see how he's acting?" Guy's on edge. Samuel stirred his coffee once, slow and steady. His mind worked like a tide, constant, quiet, inevitable. Every insult, every mistreatment, every breach of protocol, he recorded it all in that precise memory of his. When the hall began to empty, he took out his phone. Old model, military issue, still functional. His thumb typed with practice speed. Confirmed. Hostile leadership patterns observed. Proceeding to next phase, the message sent. No name, no number, no signature. Just silence after. He leaned back, eyes narrowing on the group outside the window. Reed was there, laughing too loudly, trying too hard to look in control. Reed turned. Samuel stood tall, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise like a blade through water. "You put your men in danger, Reed. That's not leadership." "Enough," Reed spat. "You're done here." The instructors reached for his arm, and that's when it happened. As Samuel shifted, his sleeve caught the breeze and rolled back, just enough to expose the tattoo fully this time. The eagle, the anchor, the trident, unmistakable. But above it, etched in faded blue ink, were three small letters that stopped time itself. CMC Command Master Chief. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then one of the older instructors, a man named Dyer, 20 years in, and went pale. His voice came out in a whisper. "Holy hell. That's Silent Sam Thomas." The name hit the air like a bomb. Heads turned. A ripple of recognition spread across the trainees. They'd heard the stories. The man who led missions no one talked about, who pulled brothers from burning helicopters, who'd vanished into retirement years ago. Reed froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. Samuel's eyes met his, calm, steady, almost sorrowful. "Now you know who you've been talking to, Commander." The two instructors stepped back immediately, like soldiers realizing they'd almost disarmed a mine. Reed tried to speak, his voice breaking slightly. This isn't... Why didn't you... Samuel lifted his hand, silencing him. "Because I wanted to see how you lead when you think no one's watching." Reed swallowed hard, the blood draining from his face. The men around them stood motionless, the sound of waves crashing faintly in the distance. Samuel turned to the trainees. "Every one of you deserves a leader who trains you hard and but fair, who understands the line between challenge and abuse. That's what separates warriors from bullies." He faced Reed again. "You've forgotten that line." Reed opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, another voice cut in. It was Dyer, the old instructor. "Sir, if he's who I think he is, he outranks every one of us here." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Samuel picked up his jacket, the sunlight catching the edge of the golden trident inked into his skin. "You're right, Chief Dyer," he said quietly. "But rank isn't why I'm here." He started walking toward the command office. Reed didn't move. Couldn't. The men watched as the old man walked away, his footsteps echoing on the wet concrete like the tolling of a slow, inevitable bell. When the door closed behind him, the spell broke. The trainees began whispering, voices low, electric. Reed stood frozen by the pool, his reflection shaking in the rippling water. For the first time in his career, his command and his certainty felt smaller than the truth standing before him. The old man he'd mocked wasn't just someone's granddad. He was a ghost of greatness, sent back to measure the worth of those wearing the uniform he'd once bled for. And Reed knew, from that moment on, that everything about his command was about to change. The base was quieter that evening. Too quiet. The sun had slipped beneath the horizon, leaving streaks of rust-colored light across the ocean. The trainees were back in the barracks, their usual noise replaced with whispers. The name Samuel Thomas had spread through the camp like wildfire, not as gossip but as legend. Some said he'd once led a Black Ops team into Mogadishu. Others swore he'd survived missions that were never recorded. And every story ended the same way. Silent Sam. The dawn came heavy with mist again, the kind that seemed to muffle every sound but the heartbeat. The sky hung low and gray, stretching endlessly over the Pacific, and the training compound looked like it was holding its breath. Reed was up before the bugle. His uniform was folded neatly on the bunk, untouched. Instead, he stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man staring back. The face was the same, hard lines, square jaw, but something behind the eyes had shifted. The armor of pride that had once defined him now felt heavy, hollow. He slipped on his fatigues, not the officer's polished uniform, but the same rough training gear his men wore. For the first time in years, there was no insignia, no rank, just sweat and dirt waiting for him outside. By 0500, the trainees were assembling on the field. The air smelled of salt and tension. They weren't sure what was coming. Rumors had spread fast, that Commander Reed had been evaluated, that Silent Sam had pulled strings from some deep corner of Naval Command. Some even said Reed would be replaced, but when Reed stepped out onto the field, the whispers died. He wasn't carrying a clipboard. He wasn't barking orders. He carried only a weighted rucksack slung across his shoulder. Standard issue, no privileges. Form up. Reed shouted, his voice steady but not sharp. The men obeyed instantly, reflex guiding them. Then he did something none of them expected. He dropped his pack into the mud and said, "I'm joining you." Confusion rippled through the ranks. Even Dyer, the seasoned instructor, blinked. "Sir, what did you—" "You heard me," Reed said. "I train with you today, no rank. Just another man on the line." A few trainees exchanged glances, unsure whether this was punishment or a test. But when Reed strapped the pack tight and stepped into the mud pit with them, they followed without hesitation. From a distance, Samuel watched. His arms were crossed, the wind pulling gently at his jacket. The faintest hint of a smile ghosted across his face, the kind that belonged to someone seeing a spark reignite where they'd thought only ash remained. "Push-ups," Dyer called, taking over instinctively. Bodies hit the mud. Reed dropped beside them. It was brutal. Sand grinding into skin, muscles burning, lungs begging for air. The recruits had done this drill 100 times, but this was the first time they saw their commanding officer struggling beside them. Reed gritted his teeth, mud streaking his face. When he faltered, Wilson, the youngest, looked over and said, "Come on, sir. Don't you quit on us now." Reed glanced sideways, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't hear defiance in that tone. He heard brotherhood. By the fifth set, his arms trembled. But he didn't stop. Samuel stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. His voice carried across the field, quiet but firm. "That's it. Breathe through it. Control comes from calm." The trainees recognized the tone, at the way he spoke like a man who had lived every word. Reed met his eyes mid-push-up, and for a second, time seemed to slow. Something passed between them. Not rivalry, not resentment, recognition. When the drill ended, the men collapsed, panting, coated in grit. Reed rolled onto his back, staring up at the brightening sky. The fog was breaking, thin shafts of sunlight cutting through like gold veins. For the first time, he laughed. Not the bark of authority, it was a real laugh, raw and unguarded. Wilson sat up beside him. "Sir," he said between breaths, "I didn't know you could sweat." Reed smirked. "Neither did I." The laughter spread, breaking tension that had hung over the base for weeks. Wilson nodded slowly, eyes distant. "Still, feels like we should have said thank you." Reed looked out toward the sea. The rain had thinned now, the clouds parting just enough for a streak of gold to break through. We did, he said softly. Every time we became better men. That evening, far from the base, a black SUV pulled to a stop overlooking the coast. Samuel Thomas sat inside, the rhythmic patter of rain against the windshield filling the silence. He reached for the radio clipped to the dash, pressed the transmit button once and said, "Operation complete. Facility restructured. Commander's path corrected." A voice crackled faintly through the static. "Copy that, Chief. Orders." Samuel looked out toward the horizon, the sea restless and endless before him. "No orders," he said quietly. "Just heading home." He clicked the radio off, pulled a small photo from the glove compartment. An old picture of a younger version of himself standing with a SEAL team, arms around brothers who were long gone. The edges were worn, water-stained, but the faces still smiled back at him through time. He traced a finger over the photo, whispering, "Still watching over them, boys. Still keeping them right." Then he slipped it back into the glove box and started the engine. As he drove off down the coastal road, the clouds broke completely, and sunlight spilled across the water, the kind of light that feels like forgiveness. Back at the base, Reed stood on the pier, hands in his pockets, watching the same horizon. The men were laughing in the distance, their voices carrying through the salt air, not the laughter of arrogance but of unity. He smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, the old man was driving toward another horizon, another mission, another soul that needed reminding. And though no one on that base would ever forget his name, Samuel Thomas would remain exactly what he'd always been, the quiet legend who didn't need recognition to leave a mark. As the waves crashed below and the flag whipped in the wind, the world felt still for a moment, the kind of stillness that follows a storm, when everything broken has found its way back to whole. And in that stillness, if one listened closely enough, they could almost hear the echo of his voice carried on the wind. Strength isn't in the shout. It's in the silence that stands after. Then the wind rose, carrying that echo out to sea where legends never die. They simply